Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 27. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I also want to thank everyone who has liked, shared, and commented. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. I also want to thank Cerberus Strength for bringing you this episode today for free. Trusted since 2012, Cerberus is making the best strongman, powerlifting, and strength sports equipment and accessories, ensuring the ultimate competitive edge. Every one of their products is tried, tested, and proven by top-level athletes worldwide. So whether it's competing on the big stage at World's Strongest Man or training at home in the gym, Cerberus Strength equipment is reliable, durable, and of course, strong enough to handle all your training goals and needs. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use our promo code STRENGTH_game to save on your next order. And in this week's episode, I'm joined by, of course, another Georgetown Iron Warrior alum and a good friend of mine, Ben Hoffman. Ben is the Associate Director of Strength and Conditioning for Olympic Sports at the University of Maryland. At Maryland, he oversees all aspects of strength conditioning for men's soccer and women's tennis. In addition, Hoffman oversees and manages all athlete monitoring and sports technology operations, platforms, needs, and research, as well as coordinating the sports science internship program for the Maryland Olympic Sports Performance Department. Prior to his current position, Hoffman was a sports performance coach at Georgetown University and has had stops at Weber International University, Valdosta State University, and the University of Houston. A four-year athlete in his own right on the Southwestern University soccer team, Hoffman now trains and competes in Olympic weightlifting. Like I said, I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Ben Hoffman. What's going on, everybody? I'm excited. I am joined by a friend of mine, Ben Hoffman. Thanks for joining us on your COVID off day, man.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here.
Hey, so let's hop right into it. I want to kind of hear everything you got going on. It's been a crazy year, but let's get into how you kind of really started getting involved in the strength game. What really got you going, playing sports, training, growing up to eventually now competing in Olympic weightlifting?
Yeah, man. So grew up in Houston, Texas. That's where I spent most of my time kind of learning sports and playing different stuff. Soccer was my main sport growing up, soccer and baseball, and then kind of shifted in high school and then college playing soccer, played at a little D3 school. But getting into training, I guess in Texas, it's kind of a normal thing to have a weight room in your school. Even in middle school, we had access to it at some point. But being a soccer guy, I wasn't always just in the weight room. I did probably the first training I really did. My parents had a Bowflex, so I was using that piece of crap, but better than nothing, you know. So Bowflex and dumbbells up in my attic was kind of where I started to just fall in love with the training process a little bit. But kind of fast forward into college, we didn't have strength and conditioning. I was at Southwestern University. They have it now, which is awesome. But when I was there, we didn't even have a football team. They just added it back in. Funny thing, they had football up until 1950, and then they canceled the program. And we had shirts that you could buy that was like undefeated since 1950 Southwestern football. So that was kind of funny. But now they have a team. They've actually won some conference championships. They have a pretty sweet weight room. So now I look back and like, damn, I wish I had that when I was there, because I was kind of just on my own. No strength coach, soccer coach kind of wrote us some workouts here and there. But for the most part, I was just messing around in the weight room trying to figure things out on my own. So I kind of learned more of the conditioning and speed side just by what I did via soccer training a little bit more, and didn't really get into strength and conditioning until after I graduated. probably thought I wanted to be a soccer coach or something more around those lines until I got out and really got introduced to the strength world. But that's kind of how I started. And when I first got out of school, didn't know exactly what I was going to do. Went to University of Houston for grad school. Had a buddy who was actually interning with them and introduced me to Coach Jones at University of Houston. So I just volunteered and kind of started that way. And along at the same time, I was doing like personal training and some soccer coaching. So I kind of had my hands in a couple different things there. But then as soon as I got in with Coach Jones with Houston, that's when I kind of, light bulb moment, realized like this is what I wanted to do, and just kind of increased my involvement over there. And kind of that's when it started, and I kind of moved my way up the ladder through a bunch of different places. From Houston, volunteered there for almost 2 years, and then I went to Valdosta State University. I was lucky enough to get the NSCA assistantship, I think is what they call it now, NSCA assistantship. So basically I was doing like a GA, even though I had already finished my master's at Houston. Didn't have to go to school though, so that was pretty sweet. And Coach Dosher at Valdosta, even though I had never had any team responsibilities before, I was just fresh off, volunteering at Houston. He's like, all right, I'm going to give you women's soccer. You're a soccer guys, their first year with the program, figure it out. So, it's kind of sink or swim. And the trust he gave me and that experience working with the first-time strength coach was pretty cool. And I was there for a year and a half. Lucky to work with him in that football program, because if you don't know anything about Valdosta State, they've won a few national championships, and I was lucky to be there for one, just kind of along for the ride. But great experience to a small school, but a very big athletic culture, especially that football program in South Georgia is pretty cool to be a part of. And after that's when I got the job with Raz down in Weber. That was my first full-time gig, and learned so much from that guy, because very small NAIA school, but it's something like 90% of the people that go there are athletes. So it's insane the amount of like people coming through the weight room that are just there to play a sport and want to get better. And that was a lot of fun. And Raz put a lot of responsibility on my back that probably shaped me pretty well for the coach I am today. And at one point there, I decided my wife was going to law school. My girlfriend at the time, wife now, was going to law school at GW up here in DC. And eventually I was like, okay, I need to either move and be in the same place with her, or, figure something else out. So I quit my job at Weber, moved up to DC. And that's when I started bothering Mike Hill, just to try to get my foot in the door somewhere. And I guess he didn't kick me out. And I owe a lot to him, because we eventually worked my way and was working for him at Georgetown. Spent a good amount of time there, I think just under 3 years. And that kept me alive as a strength coach. I think that moment could have gone anyway. I could have been, could have gotten out and done something completely different. Who knows if Mike hadn't kind of allowed me to come in and bother him until he gave me some teams to train. So and that brought me to Maryland after that. Getting to work with soccer at Georgetown kind of opened up the door for working here in Maryland, and kind of been here ever since.
Yeah, it's great. And it's another shocker. It's another Iron Hoya on the show. So I think I'm rolling through all those guys. I mean, I think I could get pretty much that whole tree in here eventually. So
yeah, you could probably be good for a couple of years at least, just Iron Hoya alums.
I know. And we had a few in passing. So we were kind of after each other on a few jobs where kind of our connections fell through, and we found a way to kind of like still stay in touch somehow. But I mean, your soccer experience, like throughout your whole career from playing and everything, like really served you well for like your current position, like associate director of strength conditioning for the Olympic sports. And I know you run sports science and everything there that I want to get into later, but what was really cool to kind of hear too is, besides just your soccer experience, like with a lot of high profile teams with Georgetown and Maryland being very successful, and You've had a lot of experience with that. You played, you thought you were going to be a coach at one point. I mean, you've been at the Division I, Division II, Division III, NIAA level. Like, I think you got me beat because I don't have any D2 experience yet or NIAA. So what's kind of been a difference between those different levels? Obviously, you were playing at one, you were kind of volunteering, interning at another, you've been full-time coach at a few others. Like, in your experience, like what's the difference between, besides just like monetary, like facilities wise and everything? Is there a big difference between the athletes that you're getting besides skill level?
Yeah, I figured I'd try every division just to see what's going on. It's kind of, I forget about that. It's because I did play D3. It is kind of crazy that I've been at every single one so far. I'd say yes and no. There's differences between the athletes. Like, everybody wants to train hard and compete. And at least the athletes that I've coached, there's not been a place where I'm like, man, these guys just don't want to be here. What are they doing? Definitely a talent difference. And I haven't worked at the D3 level. I know that's where there's some funky rules where, off seasons, voluntary and that kind of thing. And just thinking about back to when I was playing, some of my teammates were, complete bums in the off season. So I could see that from a strength coaching perspective being really frustrating. But I would say even at Weber, where it was such a small school and not a very high level, compared to like where we are now, they trained hard and we ran it like a program. So I think it almost comes down to more how you organize the program and what your expectations are. There's always going to be skill differences and, facility and resources. But if you set up that program and have high expectations and kind of explain to the athletes why you're doing things and what we're working towards, I think it's pretty similar.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, working at the D3 level and playing at it too, you can kind of see, and yeah, it does have funky rules with it, but NIAA and D2 have funky ones too, with maybe not so much on like our side of it with the coaching side, but how scholarships work, how fundraising, all that, how game, like NIAA, like, I don't know, like the number of people that are allowed to play on a certain team. There's like grade point average. I don't know. There's some funky stuff that I've heard other people say. I know Weber's in a different situation because like 90% of the students on campus are athletes. So,
yeah. And it almost seems like NAI, there's like no rules. I remember when I was at Weber, I must have been like 25 or 26 at the time. And there was a kid on the football team that was 27. And I'm just like, what is going on here? Like,
it's wild. Yeah. But I agree with you, man, with the expectations and everything, because working, like when I worked at Salisbury, is a Division III that no one knows about unless you're on the East Coast.
mm-hmm.
Like there's signs posted up outside the weight room, inside the weight room, like at all the entrances, basically saying, if you are out of season for your team, this is voluntary. It's in their packets. We have to put those disclaimers and everything. Yet the reason that they're so successful is because they willingly choose to come in. And it's definitely like changed my insight in how I approach coaching my athletes, because I'm now at a Division I school. And sometimes it frustrates me even more that these athletes kind of feel like they're being forced to, because I remember going back, these kids aren't getting paid to go to school here. They willingly want to play. They want to put everything on the line. There's a sign that tells them don't come in unless you really want to. And I've got Division I players on full rides that are complaining about lifting.
Yeah. You got to pull teeth sometimes at this level to get them in, and they have every resource known to man to kind of get in here and be a better athlete. It is kind of crazy.
It's wild. And like you said it yourself. Like, we know, for those that don't know, Texas high schools, you can make a pretty good living as a strength coach there. They probably have nicer weight rooms than 50% of the Division I schools, and the colleges are, I mean, it's an arms race, especially with some of those big state universities there. But you said it yourself, like soccer kind of often gets a bad rap about training and being allergic to the weight room or whatever you want to say. But have you kind of found this to be true in some regards, being at Georgetown in Maryland? And then if that was kind of the case, how have you kind of been able to instill some training, your training philosophy, and actually get them a little bit more involved just outside of speed and maybe conditioning work to build some buy-in and then actually kind of break through some of those weird perceptions and cultures surrounding soccer performance?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true to a certain extent. I think there's no denying that. Like in general, soccer guys can be allergic to the weight room. I've actually seen maybe the opposite from women's soccer. Like any place I've been, women's soccer likes to get after it. Maybe I just got lucky. And I think I've been very fortunate, especially at Georgetown and then here, just the people that worked with those teams before I did. So at Georgetown, the two coaches that worked with soccer right before me were Sean Foster and Chris Tolzman. So those guys already were getting after it in the weight room. So it's pretty easy for me to kind of continue that. So what I've noticed is you'll just have some individuals that are a little bit scared of really working hard in the weight room. They don't want to get too big. They don't want to get too bulky because obviously on a soccer field, you got to be able to cover pretty good amount of ground. Same thing when I got to Maryland here. We had a pretty good training culture. Didn't do exactly everything like how I wanted to. I had to slowly install some of my Olympic lifting kind of background and that kind of thing. But in general, they worked pretty hard, but of course had a few guys that it was harder to get them to buy in. And one thing I've always noticed is it takes like 2 or 3 years to kind of get your system kind of going at a place, especially with a sport like soccer, where you kind of have to slow cook them and get them bought in and kind of get some of the older, less bought in players kind of to move on, and then things operate pretty well. So I don't really like now these guys are working hard. They come in and get after it. Are they the strongest guys ever? No. But do they need to be that strong? They're soccer players, you know what I mean? And that's coming from me, having used to play and now spend most of my time, squatting and Olympic lifting and stuff like that. So I got to keep it in the back of my mind that, yeah, I remember what it's like to play and run that much and kind of keep things realistic for them. So I guess for me, getting that buy-in is kind of relating back to them as soccer players and kind of knowing what to expect and kind of what their thought process is. So if I can connect that and tap into kind of what they're thinking, it's easier for me to get them to buy into some of the things I want them to do. But yeah, so I would say yes and no as far as some of them are allergic, some of them aren't, and just kind of take some time to get them to see the light, if you will, and at least get a little bit stronger. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've seen that from soccer. When I was at Georgetown, it was kind of the same way. I think it's hit and miss, especially with individuals. And I couldn't agree with you more too about like the time it takes to kind of get your whole system in place. And honestly, with a team that's kind of got a few people in it that really are pushing back against the involvement of it, it takes a little bit longer. And 2 to 3 years sounds about right. And then honestly, once you finally get your first, like you get that freshman class you originally had all the way through to seniors, and then they're gone. Like that's what I'm starting to experience with my teams here, going into my 5th year. No one knows anything different other than like when freshman comes in, they know nothing different except for me. And all the players that are involved in it have only seen my training style, what our culture kind of envelops, and then they can kind of pass it back down to them rather than a mix of what they were doing previous to now. So it takes a bit, and that's why I don't understand people that want to program hop so much. You really don't have the time to instill something in a season and then you don't even know if it's going to stick going forward.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm in my 5th year now. So I've had 4 years here at Maryland, and same thing, like finally got a full class through. Like there's a few guys lingering around that were freshmen when I first took over. And I think 2 players that, redshirted or were injured or for some reason had a previous strength coach for like one semester. So 100% with what you just said, like it does kind of become automatic, almost take it for granted a little bit, where it kind of stuff just operates. And you're like, all right, new class of freshmen, here's what I want to do, and get them in, and you don't have to worry about the older guys anymore. But yeah, sticking around definitely has its benefits as far as doing that. And I mean, one thing with the soccer side of things I'll add is I've been spoiled by being labeled like the soccer guy. And soccer coaches tend to be like, oh, you're a soccer guy, you know things. And even though I might do same exact stuff as a football strength coach might do in this certain situation, because I'm a soccer guy, it just makes it better. And I'm pretty small and skinny, so they don't think like, okay, he's some huge meathead, even though I'm probably pretty big meathead myself. So,
Hey, well, at least you can use that to your advantage. So. Yeah. And I'm gonna keep the next question on that topic anyway, even though I won't call you the soccer guy, but your experience and background and who you work with right now kind of tends to lean in that direction. But you have experience playing, like you have experience coaching in at different levels. So with all that kind of in place, like in that insight, does that kind of give you a little bit more buy-in with the players? And then with your experience, like in Olympic weightlifting, because you have that buy-in from the soccer side, does that help you implement some of those training philosophies from weightlifting into your program? Or do you kind of steer away from that, knowing that a few guys, that's a big step into actually like lifting and sport performance?
Yeah, so definitely the soccer side, I think with any sport, like having played the sport or being very in tune with it and knowing what's going on helps you, like you need to know the lingo, need to know basic like training strategies. I've taken it a little bit further since I wanted to be a coach at one point. Like I have some soccer licenses. I understand like practice plans, like what the coaches are doing. And so that side of things, I can talk to the guys about practice specifically, or I can relate things from the weight room into kind of movements that we want to see on the field. And that's, almost second nature for me because I played my whole life and tried to coach, and now I've been strength coach for soccer pretty much since I started. So I think that side definitely helps. And even if you're not a soccer player, just being around the sport more, you start to pick that stuff up just as like I'm working with women's tennis as well, and trying to pick more and more of that up as I go, just so I can relate things back to them. And you notice that buy-in from that as they realize that you're investing your time and learning more about the sport. On the Olympic side of things and soccer players, I think it helps that I played and now I also do Olympic lifting myself, and I can kind of bridge the gap there. But I also know that I'm not training these guys to be Olympic lifters. So they see me training and beating myself into the ground, and it's different than what I'm having them do. And so kind of slow cook them on cleans and snatches and, push presses and jerks a little bit. But explaining to them the purpose behind those exercises, and we're trying to get them stronger and more powerful. They buy into that pretty well. So I haven't had too much of an issue there. Maybe it's just I'm confident in teaching those lifts and using them for those guys, and not in a hurry to make them, clean 225 or something like that. Like we don't need to just be pushing it for numbers, but making them more athletic and kind of trying to help them be more explosive on the field. And I think they see the importance of that. So I haven't had too much of an issue there. As far as probably from the coaches, where you could get a little bit more pushback on that side, and being the quote unquote soccer guy probably has helped with that. I don't get a whole lot of questioning of what I'm doing, as long as I'm not making them crazy sore or tired for the next training session. So.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think you can build that even if you're not playing. I know you could probably say the same thing. And since you do have women's tennis in addition to soccer, obviously you didn't play tennis growing up, and you definitely didn't play women's tennis at any point in time. So, and there are differences between the different sports. I mean, the rules are the same as for the most part, but you being involved and, like you said, investing your time, talking to the coaches, going to see them, and building a rapport, understanding their lingo and everything, gives you some buy-in with them, but also allows you to figure out exactly what it is. I mean, essentially, you want to find a way to make yourself an assistant when you go to the practice. You want to be another coach at hand. Your just specialty is in sport performance, strength conditioning, but you work with that team, and you kind of have emulated that by having all those certifications, like your experience, and then just being invested within the program. With trying to find ways to implement those weightlifting techniques, like with your soccer guys specifically too. And then, like you said, with the pushback you get from a few, or uncertainty, maybe with a freshman coming in where you're trying to teach them these things, how much kind of autonomy or freedom do you have them, like, afford them to maybe a guy that really doesn't want to clean in the beginning, or like a goalie that doesn't want to like put any extra pressure on their wrist for whatever reason? Like, how much do you let them kind of play with some of the weightlifting derivatives, so they're only doing like clean pulls or high pulls, or maybe just doing like hex bar jumps or something that would mimic that movement? And then how, on the other spectrum, how close do you kind of allow guys to get towards like the full movements, knowing again that the coaches can come in and kind of see the stuff and question it? But I mean, you can obviously defend it, but you don't want it to drift too far towards what you're doing, which is competitive Olympic weightlifting.
Yeah. As far as athletes, like, I haven't had any that are super apprehensive, at least with the soccer program, super apprehensive about, catching cleans or anything like that. You'll get the normal like mobility issues or inability to get the shoulders up into the bar, so their wrists are killing them. And that just takes time, like getting them used to those positions and whatnot. Have had some particular goalkeepers that have some back issues, and like cleaning and axial loading will bother them a bit. So that's where I've used more derivatives. Have one keeper right now that pretty much just doing pulls. So he's a younger guy, so hasn't learned the full motions that well. So it's kind of doing pulls from the hang, or maybe from blocks like below the knee, things like that. Just working on those same positions, getting the benefits of that triple extension, or if you want to say triple extension or hip extension, and getting that power output, but just not putting him into the catch. So it's because he's like an old man already, even though he's probably 18 years old. It's crazy. And then, during the season, we might do some more derivatives anyway. So you see a lot of the team doing some of that, because do they need to catch every clean motion they do? No. Do they? I think we can develop power and kind of not break them down as much with some of those. With as far as kind of progressions over time, I learned a lot from Chris Tolzman and Sean Foster on this side of things. So I kind of probably just don't do it quite as well as Sean does, but I follow similar type progression. And I try to get everybody to go in from the floor as soon as they're able to, at least with clean snatches. We don't necessarily all have the mobility to do that. But so I try to get them to cleaning from the floor, and then I think it makes some of those derivatives and working percentages off that main lift a little bit more effective. Now, I'm not going to just grind cleans from the floor and test one-on-ones all the time, but I think it is a good skill to have. Like, if you can't pick a bar up off the ground and catch it, it's not that difficult of a motion to do. I think they can do it, and then it makes programming hangs and derivatives and things down the line way more effective.
Yeah, I would agree. Picking, kind of choosing your battles when you actually want to add full movements in, or when you want to use more derivatives and not even catch some movements and do some clean type pulls. Especially manipulating that in season is a great point, and finding ways to still be able to produce that power without kind of the necessary like eccentric force that you're going to get from catching. And I mean, those things are good, but like right now in your current situation, playing every 4 days and then having the uncertainty of maybe some guys being out due to COVID or travel and all those things, like it's risk reward at that point. So
Yeah,
being
for
able,
sure.
yeah, so being able to like figure out exactly when you want to implement those movements is better served probably in the off season developmental phase too. So that's a great point. Hey, with your weightlifting background and everything, what kind of initially got you kicked into it, like after the Bowflex days? Like what really kind of drove you into that? Because after soccer, like you weren't playing anymore. What kind of drove you to want to still stay competitive? Because I know you've done a few competitions in weightlifting and you're still heavily involved in it. So what kind of sparked that interest, and how does that help you with your coaching now?
Um, yeah, so probably working on the Bowflex was my first questionable decision. And then when I got done playing, I've always been kind of like addicted to training, and whether it was preparing for college soccer, and then when I was done, you have that like, oh shit moment, like what am I supposed to do now? So I just kept on training. Second questionable decision was doing like this is before CrossFit was super popular, and they just had like the workout of the day posted on the website or whatever. So did some of those until I realized it was really stupid, not for me. But it did introduce me more into the Olympic lifts. I do have to technically thank them for getting me into Olympic lifting. Basically taught myself. And then, I was getting into strength and conditioning at the same time. Took the USAW level 1, which looking back now is with Ursula Papandreou, which is crazy. Like I had no idea who she was at the time. And now I look back and she was the one teaching my USAW course, which is nuts. But out at Incarnate Word, I think in San Antonio. And it's just like, okay, she's, former very good weightlifter and one of the best well-known coaches in the US now. So pretty cool. But that really opened my eyes. There were a bunch of people there that were way better than me. And I was sore as all get out from just doing barbell work for 2 days. Probably the sorest I've ever been. I was like, man, this is crazy. But you kind of get that itch that you're like, okay, I could be okay. I could get into this. And just kind of over time, kind of got into it. And really when I got to Georgetown is when I had already been training pretty much exclusively Olympic lifting, like following some Greg Everett programs, things like that. But it wasn't like until Georgetown where I got in an environment where I was training with other people, which I think kind of just makes the difference. And that's when when I fell in love with Olympic weightlifting, and I've done a few competitions since then, and just kind of grew into it. And now that's the addiction for me. It's like I plan my day around training, kind of plan my week around my training. Obviously the job is more important, but it's like, okay, when am I going to get my lift in today? What's happening? I haven't competed in a while, but I've always been very like internally motivated. So I'm just trying to beat, previous numbers I have. So of course I pick a sport that's very hard to continue improving, but kind of always still reaching for it, trying to hit PRs or feel good about it and learn new things. So it's kind of where I'm at with that.
That's cool. But all you do when you get stuck with that, coming from the strongman background, is just make new personal records for yourself. So this is the best 3RM snatch on a Monday when it's raining.
Yep, of course.
Just give
the Donnie Schenkel method, it's like personal best in something every day.
There you go. Hey, but I couldn't agree with you more too. I mean, as much as I used to bag on CrossFit, like just based off like HQ, which was probably, I was centering my anger towards them more than anything. It really introduced a lot of people to a lot of different training modalities and different strength sports that most people, just because of the pull they had, most people did not know about some of those other fringe sports. So it is a good thing that it kind of turned you on to those. And I mean, my USAW course was the same way. I had Leo Totten in it, and he was leading the session, and I got paired up with one of his junior national guys. And like I was competing in strongman, and I was like, I can whip around a bar for a while. and my hands were cheese grated after day one. And this kid is ripping through snatches because he just wanted to coach, but he was trying to find a way to like just one up me and everything. And I figured out really quick that there was no way I was going to be able to keep up with him. And it was humbling, but it really got me fired up to keep going. But I know when I worked with Sean and when I was around all those guys and when Carl was really infatuated with Olympic weightlifting, that's when I got to really perfect myself. And I couldn't agree with you more, because when you're in a group and you guys can give each other immediate feedback, you see one guy doing it and you can kind of fix the technique, or you can kind of give each other corrections. It helps yourself, but it also helps them at the same time. So being in kind of like that club atmosphere or a staff lift where everybody's kind of doing something similar and you can give that feedback right away, it kind of drives the passion a little bit more, but it also drives your performance to be better as well too.
Oh, 100%. And just a little bit of the collective suffering, I think, too. Like, especially if you're in like a phase of tens. Because we ran, Sean introduced it to Tolles. Tolles introduced it to me. We were doing a lot of peer-based programming and just working up to 10 RMs for 3 or 4 weeks straight. And meanwhile, doing all the lifts at the same time. So, we're sitting there beating our heads against the wall collectively, and you try to do that by yourself and it's just miserable. But for some reason it's way easier to get through when someone else is suffering right next to you. So
oh yeah, shared misery is way better than
for sure
than solo. Hey, so shifting gears a little bit, at Maryland as well, and like with your normal team duties, you're also managing and kind of overseeing all the athletic monitoring, sports technology, basically for all the Olympic sports in addition to your teams. So can you explain kind of a little bit like what your day-to-day duties kind of look like? And then another big thing with it, you're a sport coach, but you're doing a lot of data-driven stuff with sports science. How do you kind of balance the two without kind of tending to pull too far towards the technology and data side and still be able to coach?
Yeah. So definitely the sports science piece is something we're, trying to build over time and always trying to get better. It's like I consider myself almost a wannabe sports scientist because I got thrown into this role and trying to figure it out. But so day to day for men's soccer, I'm doing all the data collection. We use GPS, VX GPS system. So kind of monitoring that, and then that's, distributing units of practice, collecting it, downloading the data, and then getting it presented to coaches in a way that makes sense. As far as kind of the role of coordinating it within our department, it's making sure some of the other strength coaches who use similar systems or the same system know how to do that. So it's onboarding them when they first get here, problem solving on any issues that they have. And then helping out on other things. A big piece that we've added, over the summer, was Smartabase. So it's a Fusion Sports AMS, athlete monitoring system. So that's where we're housing like all our data. And it's a really cool system, but it's not the most intuitive thing because you can do almost anything. So it's very, like, its capability is very high, but it takes some figuring out how to make it do what you want. So I spent a lot of time learning how to build dashboards, how to create forms that allow you to upload the data that you want. So from the various systems that we're using, from wellness questionnaires, from RPE, all that kind of stuff. So we got a bunch of different teams doing a bunch of different things. So it's kind of figuring out how to bring that together and then present it to the main, people that need to see that info, whether it's sports med, coaches, the strength coach for that sport. So I'm kind of learning as we go, kind of how to facilitate all that. But we have some good people around to help. And I think it just takes time to build that up. And like you said, I think it's really easy to get too far on the data side where you're looking at everything and taking it as the end all be all. I think the fact that I, spent so much time without the technology, that's kind of where my foundation was. And then I've added technology, at least in my brain, as like a supplemental piece of information. And I think that's where it's very useful. It's not the thing that's guiding every decision that you make, but it's a piece of the puzzle that you kind of start to look for or look at and look for trends and things like that that kind of help answer some questions that you might have. I guess that's probably the best way to put it. Like the main utility of monitoring and data is answering certain questions. So like soccer team, how much high intensity work did we do today? How hard was this practice actually? What did the numbers kind of support? And that's kind of the way I try to look at it. And it's interesting for me, like with some of our teams that are relatively new to data, just get new information or new systems, and they want to look at so many different metrics at the same time. And then it becomes paralysis by analysis. And you're like, okay, we're looking at this metric, and this metric, and this says this, well, this other one says this. So what are we going to do at practice? And then they end up just not changing anything and just practicing like they would, but they spend all this bandwidth in their head of looking at the numbers and just getting super stressed out, and probably stressing out either myself or the strength coach that works with that sport. And it's just not the most efficient way of going about it. So I think keeping it simple and knowing what that data really can do for you is probably the way to go. And you can always expand on it over time. So probably when I first got here, and it was my first time working with GPS, it's like, okay, we were looking at total distance, high intensity distance, and like maybe I would check their max speeds. And that's pretty much the only things I looked at, because I didn't really want to overwhelm myself. And that's kind of what they had looked at. And then over time, kind of start looking at more things like acute to chronic work ratios and different load metrics, and accelerations and decelerations, and kind of different, I guess, higher level kind of analysis of those numbers. Kind of build that in over time once you have a good grasp of those real simple things.
Yeah, that's great advice too. I felt the same way when I added it with one of my previous teams, and there's a few teams here as well using the same system. And I was actually using VX over when I was at Loyola, and we got the same system here, the football program, and I was working with the staff to kind of get them up to speed on the stuff. But technology changes so fast that even in the few years of absence that I didn't have it, it was completely different. So, but I agree with you, like finding ways to work with it beforehand and not just kind of be thrown right into using it and using it as a crutch almost to guide every single decision is the best approach. Like you should use it supplementary, and it should be kind of almost, I mean, most of the coaches know just kind of gut feeling, and when someone is subjectively, they're doing too much or they cover too much ground, and it's used as more an objective feedback to kind of reassure yourself or kind of find anybody that's really hiding. Like RPEs, wellness scores, all those things can hide some stuff, and this kind of just helps fill in the gaps and bring things to new light if you get one of those outlier players, if anything. And then again, find trends, guide yourself, and then help assist you with some of those decision makings, not be the end all be all. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, it's cool that you're kind of learning on the go with it as well. I mean, like we said, it's changing all the time. New systems are coming into place, so you can't really familiarize yourself with everything. So I know you guys you're kind of leading the forefront of an internship program too. So what do you guys kind of go through with the sports science internship? Like how many people do you actually have on staff, and how do their roles kind of fit in? Because it's a learning process for you. I'm sure it's an even bigger learning process for them as well. What's the goal for them coming into your program to actually, like, what do you want them to ultimately get out of it?
Yeah. So still technically in development of it, and kind of working with some of the administration at our school to get it 100% approved. COVID I think we would have been started by now, but COVID kind of ruined that. So we haven't actually gotten any interns specifically for sports science yet, but it's kind of in development. We have kind of curriculum, what we want to work on and go through, but kind of the vision between myself and then one of our other coaches, Lorenzo, kind of helps me on the sports science side of things, something he's super interested in. So we're trying to build it to where we can take some responsibilities off the strength coaches on our staff, so they're not having to spend time downloading data and, analyzing all this data when they have two other teams and other lifts and practices to be at. So get someone who's more interested in the data analytics side of things via some interns, whether it's in the kinesiology department or maybe computer science or even business. Get some students on that end that are interested in that side of things. So that's kind of the target population we want to hit at least first, and then maybe eventually we open it up like our strength conditioning interns that can come from anywhere. But it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, where we need some help kind of doing some of the grunt work, but also want to provide an educational opportunity for them learning about athlete monitoring, the kind of analyses that we do with all this data, and maybe getting them some to give some input, because I'm sure some of these departments and these kids in these departments are way better at stats and might have some like crazy ideas for what we could look at between, or, on soccer, maybe like shots on goal, like percentages or goals per game, those kind of stats, and pulling that in and comparing it to VX data. So maybe somebody we pull through has those kind of capabilities. But ultimately, we want to bring them in and take them through our curriculum, which would kind of go through different monitoring strategies, go over the different systems that we have. So we have VX Sport GPS, we have VERT for our volleyball program, which is like an accelerometry based. We have Strive with field hockey, which is like GPS mixed with surface EMG, which is an interesting concept. And then we're doing, RPE load with a bunch of teams, wellness monitoring with everybody. And baseball has some things like they use Rapsodo and something else for like spin rates and stuff like that. So a lot of different things that we can go over. And then also different monitoring strategies like jump testing. And we eventually want to have force plates, so we can do jump testing on force plates, maybe mid-thigh pull tests. But just covering those wide ranges of monitoring strategies, whether it's like a daily monitoring on practices or maybe periodic testing, and introducing those people to those systems and kind of how we track it over time. And I think now that we have Smartabase and you have one place where you can centrally locate all that data, it makes it a lot easier to kind of build that system and then get people to kind of learn through that. So that's kind of what I envision it as. Hopefully in the fall, we will get that rolling. We'll just see if they ever let us have interns. So.
Yeah, we're all going to wait and see if that actually happens, but no, that's a cool process. I like how you have a structure to it, the curriculum and everything. And that kind of leads into my next question, how I wanted to know how you introduce any advice for someone that's trying to introduce all these things into a strength conditioning department. And you kind of answered it a lot. I mean, you're going piece by piece. You have a dashboard in place where you can kind of keep the data. You're bringing people in that are probably more invested into the sports science side, that might have a background specifically in sport and then have some data analytics side to it, or computer engineering, whatever it ends up being. But it takes a little bit of pressure off the strength coaches. And then you can basically say, this is what we want for our sport. Each sport has like an individual thing that's kind of attuned to what they're actually doing involved in their sport. And then you're kind of just building on that until you eventually get to a big thing. And I think a lot of different programs see it from the outside perspective and say, hey, well, Maryland has all this stuff and every single team is using sports science. We have to catch up to them. It's like, well, you didn't really understand that there was a process involved. Like they were probably doing wellness scores and questionnaires on paper before they started using an app, before they had a dashboard, before they had GPS, before they had force plates. So there's a step approach that has to be involved into that. But how do you guys kind of stay, or how do you yourself kind of stay up to date on all the science research and kind of benefits of using these technologies, and what kind of goes about into your decision-making process of which one to choose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like there's so many resources out there. I can't pinpoint like one specific thing. Like, I mean, I'm on Twitter and Instagram a lot, and you might see something and like it references, I don't know, like certain force plate company, and then you go off and you look at that and you kind of learn about force plates. I think during quarantine that was one thing. Like we haven't had it yet, but that's probably the next big thing in technology that I would like to get, just because I think the testing, the numbers you can get for like a vertical jump, for example, are a lot more descriptive than just using a just jump map. So it's kind of like on my wish list, I suppose. So saw something, everybody was doing webinars during quarantine, saw like Hawkin Dynamics doing some. So then I looked into those and watched different things from like NSCA clinics talking about isometric mid-thigh pulls, and just try to learn as much as I could. So now I have a decent base of knowledge for it, but still no force plates here. So still have to wait on that, but it's kind of finding that information is how I tried to just do it in all kind of different locations. NSCA just came up with that Essentials of Sports Science book, and they're making a new certification. Not that I really feel like I need to make a certification, but it might help things as far as progressing our sports science department here. So that's a good resource, and I just bought that book and started it. And from the sports science side of things, I think it's a pretty good resource as far as like a compilation of a bunch of different sources. Because I think that's the hardest part is, there's some information about GPS here, or there's information about monitoring in soccer, but how do you get that for other sports? It's kind of like piecing together all those different sources and just kind of reading stuff over time, if that makes sense. But there's another good resource. What's the author? McGigan, I think. Mike. I might be butchering his last name, McGigan or McGeegan. It's a monitoring book. I'll have to look up the name. I forget the name of the book, but it's a pretty good resource. I just on a whim like looked up monitoring books on like Amazon or something, and that was one of the highest rated, and kind of pulled that through and read it, and it was good. But it's kind of my very chaotic way of trying to find information, I guess.
No, it's a good way. I saw that book pop up as well. I didn't realize that there was going to be a certification associated with it, but
I think it's still in the works. Like you can't sit for it yet or anything, but
right. No, I think that's good. I mean, with the amount of teams and the amount of programs that are starting to utilize it, and obviously when you start to see it pop up in the pros and professional ranks, then it's going to trickle down to Power 5 schools, and then other Group of 5 schools, and then the lower ranks, the other divisions, and it's just inevitable to happen. And I think that was one of the driving factors why, in addition, we got that at Loyola. Obviously, I was taking body weight, doing wellness scores, doing RPEs, training load, like figuring out if they were actually eating breakfast and stuff.
yeah.
All before I even pitched the fact that, hey, we should get GPS. And so we can do these things even more, after they saw the benefits from the paper. And one of the big factors is, hey, we're going to recruit guys coming in that are playing for club teams that already have GPS. It's going to look pretty bad if they come in and we don't have it. So I get the push that it kind of has. I just hope people don't realize that it doesn't solve a lot of problems. It actually probably adds a lot more work to your plate. And I think you guys are doing it the right way, with kind of dispersing some of those duties and bringing in people that can help alleviate some of the added hours that are going to be added on to you guys for sports technology. Since
it definitely adds a lot of time. And I think it's important you said that, because I started the same way, doing just like surveys by hand or RPE, just writing it down on a piece of paper afterwards. And then when I was at Georgetown, figured out Google and how to make, sheets and forms and stuff like that. So I felt so technologically advanced, doing that. And it's funny because I was doing that, it's all monitoring, it's all workload management, even though you're not getting it from a, little square GPS unit. It's still the same kind of scientific process, and it opens up the conversations with your athletes, which ultimately is what you want to have. It's like you're answering some of those questions, like how are they responding, how are they feeling about training, that kind of thing. So you don't need all the technology to do that. Technology just adds a little bit more, I guess, objective information to some of it. But research shows that RPE load can be just as accurate, if not more accurate, to loadings. So I think it's important to say, like, you don't need all that crazy technology. And like you said, the recruiting bit of it probably is more the driving factor, especially at this level, of why they have those things. And just there's some resources out there too, like building dashboards for free. Like there's a lot of, I see it on like some of the Facebook special interest groups, hey, check out this free Google Sheets dashboard on player monitoring that you can go and learn how to do. So there's so many free resources out there. So I would say like the technology side of things isn't like a major barrier for doing a pretty good job as far as like a sports science side of things goes.
For sure. And I think you hit the nail on the head with technology. It really opens up the conversations. And that's the one thing that kind of worried me about the technology, that we would use the information to kind of treat the players like science experiments. It's like, well, you ran this much, you did X, so therefore it's this, without any sort of insight. Like, do you actually feel well, or do you think you can play a full practice? How's your body feel? Honestly, it really just starts the conversation. Or since we're limited on time, when you see a red flag pop up on your dashboard, or you see someone that their numbers kind of trend in the wrong direction, that's who the person you can put the most focus on is. And that's where you start really having those conversations. And that's really where I started using it, because I realized that my time was short. It's valuable to figure out who are the problem areas and actually have those conversations and solve that fix. And if that doesn't catch everybody, that's fine. But if it helps me direct my attention to the one or two guys that really are having a hard time and under recovering or overstimulated, then it's worth the money at that point.
No, yeah, for sure. And I think on the flip side of that is, like, you might have a group of kids that looks fine, like their loading is right where you want it, but then we only see them for a few hours out every day, so who knows what the hell they're doing on the outside. And that's the downside. Until we can put a chip in them and know what they're doing every minute, every day, like, it's only a small snapshot. So you got to kind of, that's where the relationships with those athletes and kind of knowing how they are, knowing what they do, having the conversations. It's like, hey, okay, this is a person that likes to go and do a bunch of extra work. It's like, you got to educate them and kind of explain why maybe at these times where we know, like, based on our GPS data, we're doing a lot of work. It's, an off season early in the week or whatever, whenever you happen to have high training sessions. And it's like, okay, still comes down to the relationships with those athletes to make sure they're doing the right things on the outside, because they could easily mess up anything that you're trying to monitor or kind of explain to them as they go, just by what they do the majority of their day when you're not around.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it doesn't get to the 24-hour surveillance side of it. I've heard from, I won't mention what school it was or what the coach was, but I've heard some horror stories of, and it was actually kind of funny, of the coaching staff using Whoop bands or some sort of like wearable technology where they could track their heart rate and their like stress, basically the whole time they had it on. And they started wondering why their numbers were high, and then why, like, they were getting so little sleep. And it was because their heart rate was through the roof at 3 a.m. and they're college 18 to 24-year-old athletes. Like, I really don't want to know what you're doing at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we actually looked into Whoop, and I've heard those same kind of stories from various places. We looked into Whoop and had legal at our school actually saying that we couldn't do it. So, I mean, which I think is the right call. Like, I don't actually want to have, chips on athletes 24 hours a day. That'd be way too much stuff to look at anyways. But yeah, they need to, like you said, they're college students. They're going to do things in the middle of the night and whatnot, and they probably should, whatever. We were all in college at one point, but I don't need to think about that or hear about it. So they can just go do their thing as long as we're able to, train and get after it the next week or whatever. So.
Yeah, you want to track their sports performance data, not their just performance data. Yeah. However you want to interpret that. Hey, so the one I had for you too, since you guys you're in the strength conditioning side and you're starting to incorporate more of the data-driven stuff and technologies, there are some universities that are kind of going the opposite direction. And it might be something that you guys are looking to, like 5 years down the line, once that internship program kind of develops and you have the curriculum and maybe have the funding to make it its own department and you can kind of pass it off. But where do you kind of see this relationship between strength conditioning and all the sports technology, like the sports science side of it, either evolving, or like where do you see the relationship between those two departments, if they are separate, like having the best sort of relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's actually something we've been talking about a little bit lately. Not necessarily making a separate department, but almost a sub department. So, like 100% hypothetical. Let's say we were able to make a sports science department kind of under Olympic strength and conditioning, because right now it's just me adding that to my role essentially, which makes it hard because it adds a bunch of stuff that you have to do, way more responsibility, and still have two teams that I'm training and usually traveling with soccer and all that stuff. So the way I see it making sense, at least in our situation, is maybe we make that sub department and I only have one team, and then I can help a lot more with the technology across the board with all the other sports. I think in a perfect world, that becomes a separate department altogether, kind of how you have strength and conditioning, you have nutrition, you have sports medicine. It's kind of within that same realm, and kind of everybody working together, kind of building it's tough at the college level, but a high performance model with those different constituents all kind of chipping in and working together for their various teams. I don't think it's ever going to grow as much as like a strength and conditioning department. We have 6 full-time coaches just with Olympic sports. We're not going to have a sports scientist for every single sport. But I think if you had a couple people within that department that can kind of divvy up the sports, and if they're more on the data side, but just have an understanding of those sports, I think it would be a pretty effective system. But it is hard to have all of your strength and conditioning duties and then add the data analyst side of it onto that, just because I spend so much time kind of crunching numbers and looking at that stuff. And I still, because it is kind of a late career thing for me, I still don't have I feel like I don't have the greatest understanding of it. Still have a lot to learn on that side of things. But if you're coming from more like a computer science background and learning the sports, I think that can be a lot more effective as far as using that technology, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I'm also a proponent. I understand that it's not, most universities or most programs aren't going to just be able to create a whole subdivision of a department, or like you said, have a whole nother department that's in line with sports medicine, sports performance, and sports nutrition. The hybrid model, I think, is great, and getting towards it is awesome. But obviously some departments don't have the funding, are probably understaffed for those other departments as well, or some don't even have a nutrition or department or anything along those lines. So it's definitely going to be a process. There's going to be a lot of growing pains that people are going to go through. But I think where it's separate does open up a lot of opportunities, and I see the benefits of it. And one of the benefits that I really see that maybe kind of gets overlooked a lot is exactly to your point, where you have someone maybe with a computer science program that played college athletics, a different sport, or played high school, or at least like appreciates it. And then they're driving that as their sole job for multiple teams or whatever. And then they're bringing you the report for you to decipher and talk with athletic training and talk with the sport coaches. So it's another person that gets put into like the full support staff. And it's not you kind of having a hand in the performance side, a hand in going to like traveling with soccer and seeing them perform, and then having like the objective numbers. You have someone giving you the numbers specifically, and you can decipher it from what you see in the weight room, what you see on the field, and then present all sides of it, can present it to the coaches to do with it what they feel like.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it kind of how we were talking about starting off and keeping things really simple. It's kind of how we have to do things as strength coaches, or else we just get burnt out, and try to look at too much stuff and get paralysis by analysis. And I think if you have that designated sports science person with a little bit more of a computer background, where it's easier for them to create some of the dashboards and analytics or systems for analytics, I think you can do a lot more probably faster and kind of utilize more information quicker. And like you said, they can kind of pick and choose what best to provide the coaches, the strength and conditioning coaches, sports medicine staff. So it just opens up kind of more area for things for people to do, more stuff to analyze, which could be a rabbit hole in and of itself. But when it's not us trying to, burn the candle at both ends just to add that data piece, I think it could be really effective. And I guess kind of still touching on, not every school is going to be able to create that kind of department. I'd say if you can't, it's like find real simple ways to just add something maybe for each sport that's really simple, maybe standardized, whether it's, okay, we're all using this kind of RPE monitoring, and here's the dashboard that we use. So it's simple, and all you have to do is kind of take a look at what your specific teams are doing, and you can still get a lot out of that. But definitely agree, like if we can get to a point where it's a separate department, or at least a separate person, depending on the size of the school, that could be pretty helpful and probably make some of our lives as strength and conditioning coaches a little bit easier.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't envy working with those technologies anymore at the moment. I mean, between my team duties and everything, and I mean, just having all 5 of my teams are on different group text apps. So to have 5 separate apps on my phone to try to coordinate like what's going on with the team, it's like you need to simplify things and get on the same picture, because I get it helps your program, but it's throwing me down a whirlwind of just trying to keep up with what's going on. So I agree with you.
Yeah, so we have like Teamworks as a university, and then we got the Smartabase. So we're communicating a little bit in both of those, and then some of my teams use GroupMe. Then I'm sending just normal text messages to some of them, and then like within that, if you're trying to send a message and their email isn't updated and they don't ever get it, and it's just like a complete shit show. And so I completely understand where you're coming from. It's just like super hard to keep up with, and then you just keep on adding more and more things. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, my best communication is when they come in the weight room, or I just yell at them down the quad. That's that's what it works sometimes. Hey, so we end the show like any good training session with a finisher. So I got 4 quarters, 4 questions for you, and then since you are a soccer guy, we'll probably go overtime, just straight into it anyway. So we'll go rapid fire if you want to, and you can answer them as quick as you want, or you can take your time on them. But you ready?
Sounds good, man. Yeah.
All right. So first one, biggest influence in strength and conditioning and biggest influence in weightlifting.
Oh, man. Biggest influence in strength and conditioning is a tough one. I think I've learned so much from people I've worked with and worked for over the years. But biggest one, I guess, has to be Coach Jones. He was at Houston. He's with the Browns now in Cleveland. He just the first guy I worked with, learned so much because everything was new, and just gave me the opportunity. Like he didn't have any idea who I was. I just kind of walked in one day and he gave me a chance, and kind of wrote my first letter of recommendation for my next job. So I think he'd have to be the biggest one. For weightlifting, probably have to go with Tolzman just because I spent so much time learning from him and beating myself into the ground on the platform next to him. So Chris Tolzman for weightlifting, probably Sean and Carl as a close second on that. Just being around those guys definitely helped.
There you go. Hey, so what can you be found doing when you're not coaching and competing? What are some of your go-to hobbies?
I mean, I've always been big into fishing. I don't get to do it as much as I'd like to, and living in the middle of DC doesn't make it easy. I mean, we live a couple blocks from the Anacostia River, but it gets like a D rating for like cleanliness, so I try not to go over there too much. So trying to do that. I go down to Florida almost every summer, though COVID ruined that last year, but fishing with family down there. During quarantine, I got into fermenting foods. So I made some like fermented hot sauce, which was pretty cool. That sounds really lame saying it on a podcast, but that's kind of what my hobbies consisted of, especially in this last year, which has been an interesting time.
Hey, if it's hot sauce, I'll buy into any of it. So, hey, if you were not coaching in strength conditioning, what do you think your career would be in? And if you picked a different strength sport other than weightlifting, what sport would that be?
I mean, I probably would be coaching soccer. If for some reason I hadn't found strength and conditioning, I probably would have stuck that out. If I was to completely do something totally different, it'd be like marine biology or something like that, just something completely out of the way. I've always liked the ocean and kind of that kind of thing. I would have to go back and take all those, crazy science classes, but might be worth it. If I was to do another strength sport, it'd probably be powerlifting. I hate bench press, but I could probably get over that. And squatting's always been a lot of fun, so could probably get into that. But maybe have to go your route and go Highland Games, because I think you said it on one of your other podcasts. Getting outside and throwing stuff around does sound like a lot of fun. So.
Oh yeah, it's a good time for sure. Get you out of the weight room for a bit when you're already in there for 12, 14 hours, whatever it is.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so if you set up an ideal training day for yourself, what's your go-to training music or PR song? And then what's your training meal look like after that?
Go-to song. I knew you were going to ask this question, and I really don't have a good answer. What I listen to is so much based on like the mood of that day. I would say pretty much anything. If it's not Lil Baby or Da Baby, I'd be pretty good. But maybe like a Rage Against the Machine, or if I'm in the right mood, like Slim Thug. But even like during quarantine, I was working in my parking garage in my apartment building. And I didn't have any music down there, and I was hitting PRs like left and right. Like the first time in forever that I was hitting PRs on all my lifts. So maybe there's something to just some silence, or the sound of my parking garage, which makes some weird noises. But I don't know. I don't have like a specific song. But post training meal, I'd have to say going to the Tombs at Georgetown and getting some beers and like nachos is probably one of the better post training meals I could think of. Thinking back of the days, we'd go to Yates or be in Yates, max out Friday, and then go get some beers and some nachos there. It's a pretty good time. So sounds good right about now.
Yeah, that sounds great right about now. Hey, so last one I got for you for overtime. Favorite either under the bar memory or favorite coaching memory?
Under the bar memory. I mean, I can remember for some reason snatching 185 for the first time was like a big accomplishment, I think, because it took so long for me to get to that point. Because I can remember that, and I can remember hitting a 10 rep max at Georgetown, and then the next week missing 5 more pounds on after 9. I missed my 10th rep. It's things like that that really stick in my mind. Maybe that's a good memory, maybe it's not, but remember those. And probably the best coaching moment, I don't know if I have like one specific one. I mean, seeing the team win national championship. So men's soccer won in 2018, and after like a tough start to the season, so that was just really cool seeing those guys get to win. They did a really good job. That was pretty cool. And there's just anytime you have someone that struggles to figure out a movement in the weight room. I have one kid now that clean technique has always been a struggle for him. You just can't piece together the timing sequencing. And then he, even like this last week, kind of got it. And he was like, hey, check this out. And he did it. And it looked pretty good. And you can just see like the satisfaction of him, like getting that movement and feeling confident with it. And that's pretty cool to see. I mean, that's kind of why I think we all get into coaching to a certain extent, is seeing people find that success. So that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, championships aside and everything, those are great, but those small things where you see day in and day out where someone like starts to like see it click or has success or comes back and talks to you about more than just their time in the weight room, or remember some of those things like missing the 10th rep with just 5 pounds extra on the bar. Like those ones I definitely remember a lot more. And I mean, the championships are basically just a culmination of a bunch of those small ones, and that you get a ring to kind of just remember them all. That's about it.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's great when you have someone, like I had a kid, we can't make sure they are doing workouts when they go home and stuff like that. And one of our soccer guys brought back his entire packet completely filled out. And I was like, here, I just wanted to give this to you like after a workout. I didn't tell them to bring back the packets and things like that. And you're like, oh, at least one athlete is doing this stuff when we send them home. And it's like little things like that. I could sit there and think like, okay, what are the other 23 guys doing? But the fact that one guy brought it in, and obviously you're making an impact somewhat on him, and that's kind of what keeps me going, at least. And like you said, yeah, the national championships, it's almost weird. I always feel weird talking about it, but happy for them for doing that. But it makes me a lot happier when they come in and they talk about, some of the work they did over the break, or, they finally cleaned this much weight. Just seems it hits home a little bit more to me, I guess.
Definitely. That's awesome. Hey, well, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. How can people get a hold of you, follow you, or connect with you if they've got any other questions or follow-ups?
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk with anybody at any point. Probably I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I think it's Hoff Strength. Not the most active on there, more, passive participant in social media. I probably should get a little bit better at that, but it is what it is. Email as well. I think it's bhoffma4@umd.edu. Just cut my last name off a little bit on that email, but happy to answer any emails. Pretty responsive on that, so people can reach out to me that way, and we can hop on a phone and talk shop the old school way, or whatever works.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll drop all the links in there so people can find them. But like I said, Ben, I can't thank you enough for coming on today, man. I know you guys got a wild schedule with spring season going and being on the road all the time, and I'm always stoked to get another G-Town Iron Hoya on the show.
For sure, man. I feel like at this point you should have called it like the Iron Hoya alumni show or something. You got so many, but happy to be on. I know your schedule's crazy too out there as well, so hopefully we can both make it through this COVID season and keep on rocking it. So
that's the plan, man. Well, thanks again. I'll talk to you soon, bud.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com. where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.